Hello, everybody. Welcome to the session, the keynote session on helping people manage building safety risks now and in the future around the golden thread, obviously. I'm Nick Tune, Digital Director at Atkins UK and Europe. And through the session, we'll be looking at the government objectives around the golden thread and how they're looking to implement that policy. With me today is Aman Sharma, who'll be speaking first, who's the Managing Director of Totus Digital and the Deputy Chair of the Building Regulations Advisory Committee, and Rebecca Thompson, who's from the Ministry of Housing, Communities and Local Government. So without further ado, I'll hand over to Aman. As I mentioned, Aman is the director of Totus Digital and is the chair of the BSI Committee 111 and leads on the information management delivery on BS 86441 on digital management of safety and information. So I guess without further ado, hand over to you, Aman.
So apologies, Nick, I think it's actually going to be my colleague Rebecca going first, and then I shall be coming in afterwards. So perhaps I'll just introduce my colleague Rebecca, if I may. Rebecca, did you want to just pop in?
Yes, thank you. Sorry about that. So
apologies there. I got the wrong way round. So apologies, Rebecca. Yeah.
That's okay. It doesn't matter at all. But thank you, Nick, and thank you. I'd like to thank the organisers of this event for inviting me here to speak. And I'm very pleased to be able to set out for you all a bit more about the golden thread and what work the government's been doing on everything. So firstly, before I get into the detail, I wanted to take a bit of a step back, everyone, to emphasise why we are all here and why we are all doing the work that we're doing. The Grenfell fire was a terrible tragedy. 72 people, men, women and children, lost their lives in one of the most awful ways it's possible to imagine. And all their friends, colleagues, relatives are still, and obviously will continue to be, still traumatized and thinking of the people they lost. So all the work we are doing, and I know when I say we, I'm not just meaning government, I know all of you and all of industry are working, do this as well, are focused on improving building safety and ensuring that this can never happen again. It is unacceptable that people cannot feel safe in their own homes. So going back quickly after Grenfell, it became apparent that one of the issues about Grenfell, but also about other high-rise residential buildings, was the lack of information and the fact that without this information, people couldn't get information, didn't know where it was, and so didn't know what was in their buildings. Now, Dame Judith Hackett emphasised this in her report, that this was an endemic problem within industry. There was a lack of accurate, up-to-date information, and where there was information, people, it took a long time to find it, people didn't know where it was, and even when they found it, they weren't sure about who had last updated it, and therefore whether it actually was an accurate representation of the building in front of them. So she made a series of strong recommendations that people need to put in place a digital golden thread of information. And the government accepted all her recommendations on the golden thread and set out in the draft building safety bill and the implementation plan that government will be requiring a golden thread of information for all high-rise residential buildings, both new and existing, and that it will be required to save all information relating to fire and structural safety within the golden thread. Now, the aim and purpose of the golden thread is to ensure that the right people have the right information at the right time to be able to ensure the building is safe. This means the information needs to be accurate, reliable, up to date, that they can access it. But it's not just about the information. It's about ensuring people know what to do with the information. People can understand the information. People can relate it to the building. People know how to get into the system to update information, and people know who information needs to be shared with or when they need to verify it. So it's about also Golden Thread is not just the information, it's about embedding the information management processes and embedding that culture of the importance of information within all organizations in the sector. Sorry. So currently we are working closely with the Building Regulation Advisory Committee, the BRAC, their working group on Golden Thread. And Ammon is the deputy chair of that working group. So he's going to set out a bit more about that work after me. The working group, what we've done through this is try to bring together a cross-section of industry to look at Golden Thread holistically. So we're on the working group and also the Health and Safety Executive, but it's not just government, there's also housing associations, local authorities, facilities management experts, people expert on the development and construction of buildings, and more on the digital side as well. So digital experts, BIM experts, people who are drafting the British standards and ISO standards, and people like the UK BIM Alliance, Centre for Digital Built Britain. So it's trying to bring everyone together, people who use the information and people who are on the digital side, who understand how you can make these systems work. So currently we are working with the working group on getting an agreed definition and defined principles for the Golden Thread. So when I say the principles, setting out in more detail what we mean by open, accessible, transferable. So these will inform secondary legislation and sit above the guidance and standards. And what this is to do is to help industry to actually give some more detail about, okay, this is what I need to ensure the Golden Thread, my Golden Thread meets. This is what the government is requiring from the Golden Thread. And we aim to publish this during the passage of the Building Safety Bill. We're also working with the working group on doing more detailed work on the standards. So reviewing the existing standards, the British standards, ISO 19650 series. So we've had a lot of feedback, both during the consultation and through all our engagement with stakeholders about existing standards. So lots of people are very keen that we aligned with existing standards because industry are already familiar with them and feel comfortable with them. Whereas other people had various concerns about the standards, felt they were too technical, a bit too filled with jargon, or also there's such a many standards need a bit of guidance on how the standards fit together. So we're reviewing these standards and to identify, okay, are there areas that could be clarified? Are there areas where there's confusion? And then we'll be looking at, okay, then if there is, what can we do about it? Is it the standards that need to be improved? And then bear in mind that could be quite a long process, particularly for an international standard. Or is it that we can have like explanation of how do you apply these standards to a high-rise residential building? So, you know, a sort of how-to guide. Okay, how do you actually practically take this standard and could use it to design and manage your building? So we're working on this, and this should hopefully give industry a little bit, will provide more detail. And we won't be able to complete this work alongside the draft bill, but we want to set out we'll be publishing, you know, setting out a bit more about this work and our expectations of timescales about when we're able to deliver this alongside the draft bill. Now, I wanted to leave enough space for questions because I'm quite firm believer, I think, you know, most people will bring questions, and that's, it's useful to have dialogue in these meetings. But firstly, I wanted to go back and emphasize, leave you with the aims and purpose of the Golden Thread. Now, the aim and purpose of the Golden Thread is not to create a complex digital system or new IT platform. Now, I'm very not knocking the importance of digital. Digital is necessary. The digital systems is necessary to actually ensure Golden Thread works and is accessible. But that's not the ultimate purpose. That's the tool to enable the Golden Thread. The Golden Thread is simply to enable a safer building, to ensure residents are safe. Golden Thread does that by ensuring that information is accurate, up to date, and people know where to get it. And by embedding the culture change in the industry to understand the importance of information, why information is important and essential on building safety. And then the digital comes into enabling that, and enabling information to be right at the heart of how we design, manage and build buildings. Manage buildings. So that's where I'd like to leave, and I'll hand over to Nick. Nick now, thank you.
Thank you very much, Rebecca. Really appreciate it. We'll do Q&A after Ammon has spoken to us. So please keep them coming in the chat pane, your questions that you'd like to pose to Rebecca and to Ammon. So Ammon, I don't think you need another introduction. So over to you. Thank you very much.
Certainly won't say no to a second introduction. Modesty knows no bounds, to those who know me will attest to. Hello, and a very, very good afternoon to you all joining us today. I'm delighted to have been asked to speak in this keynote, what I think has been a largely successful event so far. And my congratulations go to the teams that are sitting behind the screens who have made this happen. We know well the challenges that face us today in hosting events this way, and I think there's been some insightful and very important discussion to date that I've certainly enjoyed observing in the background, and I hope you go on to continue that after this keynote. Secondly, my thanks to Rebecca for providing that what I will stress was an inaugural policy insight into the Golden Thread, the work that's been happening by your government, our government, and our expert committees and experts, of course, as well. For the first time, we've heard factual-based information as opposed to conjecture and subjectivity, which I think is really important to bear in mind as we progress through this. Rebecca's overview there now does provide me a perfect base for me to expand upon. There's two things that I would just draw your attention to. I'd like to speak towards the context and application of Golden Thread and what it means to you in industry. And secondly, just how important a high-performing industry culture will be integral to embedding the Golden Thread. So as mentioned already, I serve as Deputy Chair of Building Regulations Advisory Committee, BRAC, which is a non-departmental public body that advises the Secretary of State in England on making building regulations and setting standards for the design and construction of buildings. BRAC members are appointed independently based on their knowledge and experience across the built environment. We work very closely with our colleagues in the Ministry of Housing, Communities and Local Government across the very important building safety programme in particular. I'd rather expect the last 12 months have seen us all learn a great deal more about scientific advisory groups and the very important work that they do within government. As a committee, we've proactively taken the lead on this critical initiative by engaging with you in industry to develop and inform the Golden Thread. So we did this, as Rebecca mentioned, by standing up the BRAC Golden Thread Working Group in the autumn of 2020. The working group does consist of recognised national voices for building and fire safety, as well as industry practitioners, senior leaders, and digital innovators. The working group works very closely with MHCLG officials, developing the policy, and with the shadow building safety regulator. We're all attempting to map out how the new safety case-based system for high-rise residential buildings will operate, and how that system will be supported by the Golden Thread. We're also in very close contact with the Industry Safety Steering Group as this programme evolves, chaired of course by Dame Judy. Crucially, we made sure that the BRAC Golden Thread Working Group was represented by relevant sectors across the built environment. This is important to note, as if we truly want to ensure a positive shift in approach to the culture and practice of information management on buildings, we must recognise the need for a holistic approach and not one based solely on specific building type. The working group has brought together a variety of industry initiatives to providing a single platform for industry as a whole to work directly with government on the development of this policy. The group have worked exceptionally hard since their inception last year and have progressed a number of key deliverables to take the policy forward. Some of those high-level objectives included providing sector-specific insight, expertise, and advice on policy development and delivery, engaging with relevant industry bodies and key stakeholders, including the PSR, to ensure other sectors are aware of the work on the Golden Thread and the immediate need to deliver cultural change. And also working with relevant industry initiatives to ensure synergy and alignment to the Golden Thread policy. Now, as we've heard already, and what is well known to us now, in her review, Dame Judith identified systematic failures in the regulatory system, highlighting issues with the creation, maintenance, and handover of building and fire safety information. Made even worse, where there are areas for regulatory requirements to do so, such as Regulation 38 of the Building Regulations, provision of the handover of fire safety information. Chapter 8 of Dame Judith's final report, Building a Safer Future, first introduces to the Golden Thread building safety information. Sitting firmly behind this proposal was the need to use critical building safety information in a completely different manner than we'd done previously. Dame Judith suggested that building safety information should be considered as an asset in itself, an asset that needs procuring, managed, and maintaining, as opposed to a byproduct of arbitrary processes undertaken during the life cycle of a building. Today, the Golden Thread has become a vital component that will underpin the entirety of the new building safety regime. A regime that will enable those responsible for the safety of a building to deliver the very high standards of resident and building safety we are seeking both now and in the future. When seeking to implement the concept of a Golden Thread, I would implore you to consider these two very simple yet very pertinent elements. Firstly, what information is required to efficiently, effectively, and above all safely manage your building? And secondly, how will you manage that information? Information management is a term I believe is well understood across industry. In particular, the word manage, which draws out additional actions to be taken with that information, such as create, maintain, handover, exchange, update, and access. Now, just apply that process in a digital manner, all of which are the clear messages that were first described in Chapter 8. Now, it's the definition of digital, which is a question that elicits great debate in this area. And to explore this further, I always find it useful to draw comparisons with the current pandemic. 2020 will undoubtedly be remembered as the year our lives fundamentally changed, unfortunately permanently for a large majority of us. As we prepare to fully assess the impact, we can observe some emerging learning outcomes. As we all locked down, our community and society moved overnight into the era of video conferencing. Now, aside from the constant reminders of being on mute, errant pets running wild in the background, and overindulgent screen filters, we've embraced this unexpected digital era of working with a response that was as seamless as it was stoic. I think today and now is certainly testament to that. But bear in mind that the tools we needed to respond in this way were always there. We didn't require radical development of software. Yes, fatigue is setting in and we pine for each other's company again. But let's take stock and agree that when we were faced with this generation-defining challenge, we assessed and we reformed. The tools to do so were right there in front of us. We knew what we needed to do, we knew how to use those tools, and we got on with it. And so too are the tools we need for the Golden Thread. The delivery and application of digital Golden Thread doesn't require groundbreaking development of hardware or software, artificial intelligence or machine learning technology. You're already using them, and you've been using them for some time. As has already been mentioned, this is the first time government has addressed these requirements. So let's explore these further and add some detail to the process and application of Golden Thread. So if we consider the Golden Thread to consist of a number of fibers, what information requirements constitute the whole thread? Fire safety? Yes. Structural safety? No doubt. What about other elements of building safety that have a secondary and tertiary impact on these subjects? For example, the design, installation, and maintenance of ventilation systems, not typically considered to be categorized as a fire or structural safety matter. have been known to significantly impact building fires from time to time. Competency requirements and a record of persons who have undertaken any form of design, construction or maintenance activity on a building. Would it be appropriate to suggest that a tradesperson who's partial to an early finish might think twice about rushing through a task and jeopardizing the safety of the building if they knew a record of that activity would be there to be called upon throughout the life cycle of the building in the event that it needed to be? How about when the unthinkable does unfortunately happen and we need the intervention of the fire and rescue service? For our emergency services to be able to access information kept as part of a digital golden thread to formulate safe and effective tactical plans, instead of having to make best practice assumptions, commit valuable time to confirm safety critical features of the building before deploying those resources, I can assure you from personal experience that that would save valuable time and ultimately lives. So, quite apart from the question, what should the golden thread contain, we should be asking ourselves, what is golden to me? Above the minimum requirements I will be told to keep, what else should I be keeping to demonstrate best practice and exemplars to all those who have a vested interest in the safety of my building? We must think more broadly about the application of a golden thread. Are we reasonably expecting owners of large portfolios consisting of a mixture of building types in and out of the scope of the new regime to manage building safety information in separate ways? And if we are, what do we think the benefit of that separate development approach might be? I'd need to be convinced of the economical, legislative and moral arguments in taking such an approach. The process in applying the golden thread will be sequential. It will have a start point, of course, but should it ever be considered to have an end point? Aside from a building's demolition and end of life, I think it's essential to adjust our thinking to the idea of the golden thread being perpetual throughout the building's life cycle. It will demand your constant attention to ensure that the information contained within it is regularly reviewed, updated, and remains accessible in a format appropriate to its audience. It is not simply a means of producing and archiving a safety measure, such as a safety case or fire risk assessment. It is much, and it is more. All of which will require a shift in mindset, attitude, and ultimately culture. And I hope most would agree that what has just been outlined doesn't need new law to begin applying these processes and principles today. So why is industry still waiting? We know very well of the existing culture that has prevented innovation and early adoption across our industry. If you're in any doubt of this whatsoever, I'd invite you to reflect on the myriad of revelations and evidence heard during the course of the inquiry in Paddington. It's there that we've seen examples of behaviour that served only to empower and enable a culture that encouraged an abdication of responsibility. A culture that was viral in nature and has spread without prejudice. A culture which has clearly infected young people starting their careers in this industry. I recall such an attitude in the presence of a senior leader of an organisation responsible for resident safety as well as wider public safety. When challenged in a public forum on the lack of changes made to digitise archaic information management processes ahead of legislation, he retorted, "Being ahead of the curve is fine in some instances, but in most it represents real risk, and my job is to protect this organisation from that risk. And believe me, I will." So this organisation knew that its system was broken, yet paradoxically recognised that it had the existing tools to fix it. So evidently, the risk in trying and getting it wrong, however quantifiable wrong is, was greater than the risk of not trying at all. It was clearly a leadership flaw, and with that approach at the very top of that organisation, one could ask what hope for those who represent it. But whatever our position in the organisations we represent, we all have a part to play in bringing to life a new culture we know we so desperately need. And there is no good reason for us to be waiting for someone to tell us what to do, or how to do it, or pass legislation. We need to get on. We need to act now. We do this today through the development and adoption of standards, national, international, and organisational best practice, providing examples and giving options commensurate to the needs of the user. The Black Golden Thread Working Group, as you've heard, has brought together leading initiatives for the development of digital information management standards, data dictionaries, and design trials to ensure they inform and are informed for the delivery of the policy. I'm personally very proud to be leading the BSI committee developing BS 8644 Part 1, Digital Management of Fire Safety Information. This is a programme of work first proposed in 2018 and set up to deliver a standardised digital framework for the exchange of fire safety information throughout the life cycle of a building. But there are several more examples of innovation, best practice and early adoption, but it's still not enough. On ensuring industry moves to adopt a new approach and culture, showcasing progressive attitudes and best practice, I'm not convinced we can afford to assume a finish line here. Instead, the encouragement of a never-ending pursuit of excellence for building safety reform will help us all to stay ahead of the curve. Instead of being reactive to issues, we were to proactively self-assess, peer review our practices, and ask ourselves, how can I improve? What's working? What isn't? And how can I cascade those lessons to ensure wider adoption? I think we could make some very significant gains indeed. Now, as I draw to a close and invite your questions, I want to affirm one point, if it is only the one point that you take away from today. It is simply not enough to talk about a need for a cultural change, because there is an immediate need to change and to start changing now. Not when the Building Safety Bill becomes law, or possibly after that when its provisions start to come into effect, but today. It will require our collective effort, and I assure you, the more of us who set that bar higher and higher, the sooner we can realise a culture where accountability is an attribute that is willingly and enthusiastically sought. And by seeking to evade accountability for building safety, it's seen in the same way as trying to evade responsibility for safety on construction sites. I hope for a culture that fosters an implicit and well-deserved trust in our built environment, because safety is embedded into every single process taken and decision made when we design, build and operate our buildings. Now, in time, a balance between robust legislation and education will substantiate the dawn of this new era of building safety. We each of us have an opportunity today to demonstrate best practice, showing those watching on intently, and they are, that resident and building safety in our built environment is an unconscious, lasting, and non-negotiable priority. And all it will take for others to play along is for you to change the game today. Thank you. I'll pass back to Nick for your questions.
Thank you very much, Armin, and thank you very much, Rebecca, for those two excellent speeches. So kind of without further ado, we'll move over to questions. And as chair, I'm going to take the chair's privilege, if you like, and ask the first question from myself. You've mentioned in terms of much of the things we need to achieve this already exist, such as the tools we need and the standards we require. And listening to you speak, I'm thinking, if you're following the UK BIM framework and delivering ISO 19650 on information management and following that right through, and to some degree, the asset management standards ISO 55000, surely that is helping you meet the delivery of the data requirements and the information management you need in the golden thread. Would you agree with that sentiment? I guess asking Rebecca first.
Hello, sorry, I didn't go on video there. Yes, I would agree that I'd say that the standards are quite broad, so they're not like specific guides, and they are to the whole of all built infrastructure, not just buildings. But yes, if you were taking on board the principles, the requirements, and those standards, then yes, you probably are going to be delivering exactly what we want, because the principles underpinning that are very similar, open, accessible, understandable information, ensuring people have those processes. So yeah, if you are doing that and trying to embed that in your organization now, then yes, you will be most likely meeting almost all, if not maybe all, or superseding what we are putting in place.
Yeah,
yes.
Yeah, I totally agree. You probably supersede, probably going further than the requirements you have around safety. This is about better information management across the piece, for sure. I'm moving over to a question here from John Griffiths. I think this was the first question that we were actually given, so let's go with him first. The question was, what does the panel believe are the elements of the draft Building Safety Act that residential clients should be acting on now? And what do you think are the biggest challenges to the industry on the implementation? Again, I'm not sure if I think he might have dropped off. Hopefully he's back soon, but Rebecca, I'll ask that to you anyway.
Yeah, So one of the main points of the bill is actually making safety of residents paramount, making those who are responsible for the safety. So during construction and design, that'll be duty holders, and in occupation, it's accountable person, making sure that they're accountable for safety, accountable for any mistakes, and they must put them right. And it establishes the regulator to enforce these rules and to taking strong action against anyone who breaks them. But what I'd like to emphasize is what we just said, is that you don't need to wait for this. You shouldn't be waiting for it. You can make these changes now, get ahead of the game, put that information practice in place, start carrying out the culture change to look at your building, ensure you know what's in your building. Are you managing your risk? Does everyone in your organization know how they're responsible? And so are you capturing the information and getting it verified, and making sure everyone understands their part in building safety?
Fabulous. Amin, are you back with us?
Yeah, I think I'm back. I did drop off. Apologies for that. I wasn't trying to run away, I promise.
So by all means, try and answer both questions. That'd be fabulous if you can.
So I think your first question was around the adoption of. I caught the first part of it, but I think you were implying that by defaulting to adopt fully embedded and fully established information management standards, would you by proxy be delivering on a golden thread already? Yeah. And I think the very simple answer to that is, if that's a process that works for you and your organisation, and if that's the process and delivery of your golden thread, then the answer has to be yes. Until the detail comes out within the policies that's being worked on, and absolutely the UK BIM framework forms a fundamental part of our conversations. We won't be able to add that sort of level of detail to such an answer just yet. But my argument would be, is why would you defer from best practice? I understand well the challenge that can be presented by trying to get into the nuts and bolts of some of these standards. So you remember from the phase 1 inquiry, statutory guidance and some industry guidance was called up as being quite technical and complex, and actually that was a message that was conveyed within the King Judith's report as well. And there is an argument for that, a very strong argument. How do you speak to the non-practitioner as far as you speak to the practitioner? Because actually, the information we're discussing here applies to both, and I think the resonance groups would probably support that statement as well. So there is a piece of work that needs to be done to try and pick out the jargon. Potentially, it's something on our radar within the working group, but I would suggest that yes. Standards are there for a reason. They're normally always drafted by consensus, international, European, or British or otherwise, which means that they are best practice developed by your peers in industry, and we all have a part to play in developing them by consultation processes. So I would need to be convinced that wouldn't be the right option to undertake. Your second question as well. Sorry, can you remind me what the second question that came in from the delegate?
The second question was around what should you do now, I think, in terms of, what's the things you should be getting on with?
So for me, again, this is, every answer will be different for each person and each context and each organisation. You must start with your own impact assessment. What's not working for you? And if you can't start to unpack that question, what peers can you access to start helping you to arrive to those scenarios? The draft bill gave a great deal of detail and set the direction for that primary legislation to be laid. So it only takes a few reads, I appreciate it's a substantial read nonetheless, to start seeing the travel and the direction that the legislation is going in, and understand better how that will impact upon you, either as a duty holder or someone that's a stakeholder of a duty holder. So working that back and almost reverse engineering that direction of travel to start contextualizing it within your own situations is absolutely the starting point that I take and do take. Ultimately, though, the one word that I come back to, and I think Rebecca might have touched on it already, is accountability. There is no hiding place anymore. If you know you're a duty holder now, under what regulations that may apply, you know you're going to be a duty holder under the new regime, start taking responsibility and start actually thinking a little bit more about how that will affect you and the people in your organisation and the people that you're supposed to be keeping safe within your buildings. And I think that's as far as I would go in terms of sort of setting out, proper deliverables in terms of the actions that can be taken there.
Thank you very much. Kind of building on from that, the industry, when handing over a building, for instance, traditionally hands over, the O&M manual. The O&M manual is usually paper or a PDF, and now we're talking about handing over data, which I think is a big step change for the industry to get its head around. It's not incredibly difficult. It's not rocket science, but it's a new way of thinking, and that relates to the question that Matt Larkin put up here around, alongside the draft bill. What is the evidence that the main contractor, for instance, needs to collate to hand over to meet the legislation? I think if you're used to just handing over these O&M files, I imagine it's a little bit daunting to think, jeepers, I've got to provide all this data. Could you give us some guidance on that?
I can jump in on that one first, Rebecca, if you like. So, again, I push the question back in this case. If your O&M manuals contain the right information in the first place, what's the issue with digitizing that process? Because the information shouldn't necessarily be changing if it's the right information being handed over in the right way. And again, we have guidance. We have it within statutory guidance, and we have it within national guidance as well on what appropriate levels of information should be handed over in such processes and such activities. But it's the concept of digital by default, which is what we have to remember here, which is one of the key phrases that you can pull out from Building Safer Future. Doesn't necessarily adjust the level of information or the level of detail of information that should have been being transferred in the first place. We had these requirements already, we just weren't doing it for some reason. So the question, I think, is more about if the level of information is right, if the quality of that information is actually truly enabling safer buildings and allowing those who are in charge of safely and effectively maintaining these buildings to do so. How can you improve upon the process by which you exchange that information? And this is where we come back to that definition of digital question. Of course, we can talk about common data environments, we can talk about digital twins, and we can talk about live models promulgated by machine learning. That's really top end scale stuff that doesn't necessarily need to be the norm. We're doing digital work now. We've been doing it for years. This is simply about making sure that information is there to be called upon when it's needed, and it's relevant, it's accurate, it's accessible.
Yeah, I think there's an element, though, of taking us as an industry beyond the written word, if you like, on paper and PDF, and turning it into data and machine-readable data that systems can use. And I think you're right, it doesn't have to be in a full BIM model with AI, machine learning, whatever, but it's about having that as data that's probably sitting in a database that can be referenced easily, because back to Grenfell, that way you could have found the information about the asset way easier and more accurately than pouring through a big O&M manual, for instance. Rebecca, it'd be great to get your view on that.
Yes. So you just said that yes, the building safety bill and what we're putting in place, this whole regime, is, as I said, turning the accountability to the person responsible for building safety, and enabling them and ensuring they have the skills to be able to look at the building holistically and understand that. Part of the golden thread is supposed to enable that and to help that and to ensure that it's easier to get that data, so that you can, if you have that understanding, make those decisions and find the information easier. So it's a structured data. So you're not having to look in loads of old M&M manuals, potentially look at old previous drafts to ensure what changes have been made, everything. It's doing that structure. So it's just easier to, it's basically easier to find the information and to make the right decisions and to use that information. So that's.
In terms of structuring it, I guess I can add here, in terms of what you call that data, there's a standard ISO 23386 that basically says, the data template of how you should get the data together and how you should name those attributes associated with it. So I think, there's a standard for how to do that. And relates to one question from John Griffiths is, are you, I guess, the government going to be providing all your partners guidance, if you like, supplementary guidance and case studies that go along with that? Because I say there's the work of product data templates and there's lots of great work out there. I'm sure the industry would like to see just examples of the types of things that they should be doing? What does best practice look like?
So we will be looking at, the standards, as I said, trying to set out and potentially looking at, doing a user guide, how to apply to the standards. And so now, this is how things can be used. I think when you get into case studies, yes, there will be some guidance out there. I think there is a bit of tension in that, because what we, so like when a building's occupied, you call it like building a whole safety case about that. And there is, we might be able to find guidance or some examples, but what we don't want to go too far down is to set out, this is the way, this is what needs to be done, this is what you need to produce for your building. We can set out a pathway, but the thing is, every building is different. It's about the competency of the person, the accountable person, the building manager, to take this understanding, the standards, the guidance, everything, and see, how does this apply to my building? Okay, what do I need? How do I need to manage the risks in this building? And then set that out as well for the regulator. So the thing is, there will never be one size fits all. You do this, tick all these boxes. It's definitely, if you've checked all this off, you are covered. What it is like changing that mindset. So yes, but I think you're right, there is more that we need to do, and there will be more coming out, but there isn't going to be like a simple checklist or completely simple template that you do everything like this and you're completely covered.
Yeah. The kind of benefits of information management, good practice information management we talked about are known. And it goes to one of the questions that come here from Steve Basford in terms of, should we be applying the golden thread not just to high-rise residential? What about everything else? And I know this has been debated a lot as part of the Hackett review. It would be good, I'm sure your answer is going to be you should be applying on everything. And at Atkins, we are trying to apply this to everything, but it'd be good to get your government view in terms of, why is it specifically on this sector, and should if I'm in the industry, I'd be looking to apply this way of working to all that I do.
Yeah. So you're absolutely right. You've taken the words out of my mouth, that yes, the bill is applying to these set of buildings, but we have the power to review the regime in the future. Should the risks demonstrate, it should be expanded to other buildings. And yes, I was going to throw the question back to attendees. So you're right, Nick, that the question is, why wouldn't you apply it to other buildings? Take this in form. And why wouldn't you embed it and roll this out more widely? I think of why we have chosen the set of buildings is it's about the risk and the proportionality of that of the approach about the regime and where people the highest risk buildings. But I will say that there is we would very much encourage people to be looking at how they work and about applying this in their buildings, because the bill does have the power to expand the scope. There will be looking at buildings about what the risk levels are, and this is definitely going to be something that lots of people are interested in. So just because the scope is where it is today, that doesn't mean in the future it won't expand and cover a wider section of buildings.
And Amin, in your world as a practitioner, what's the main what's the guidance, if you like, that you're giving to the people you work with on this?
I think this comes back, albeit loosely, to the cultural question as well, and coming in undertaking these processes and trialing these practices within your organisation today, you get to strength test benefits or otherwise of reforming in this area. I go back to what I said in during my speech, and this question of, if you are one of the UK's largest property owners, home builders, whoever you are, why would you choose to manage information differently based upon the typology of your portfolio? I haven't yet been convinced of the cost efficiencies or the beneficiaries that would be systemic throughout that process by applying a two-step approach to it. I just wouldn't choose to do it personally, and I don't see what the argument would be for doing that. So as Rebecca says, whilst there is scope within the draft bill to change buildings in scope, the real question, and Rebecca's right to push the question back onto industry, really, to say is, well, why would you choose not to? As far as why you would choose not to start these processes today, why would you want to do it any other way for any type of building? Because if it's bringing you efficiencies in areas that you didn't know, you didn't first realise the efficiencies were achievable, I think the industry will probably just react in the way we expect it to react.
Thank you. Building on that one, I saw a question around sustainability. Now, as we are in a climate crisis, the government has understandably dealt with another crisis around safety in high-rise buildings, but we're in a climate crisis, and the golden thread offers a real potential for us to understand the data about our built asset and then to mitigate the issue, whether it's an energy reduction or optimization of renewable energy, things to reduce the carbon footprint. I guess I ask the question then, why isn't the legislation being used to improve the environmental footprint of our built assets if we're in that climate crisis? And maybe I'll start with you, Rebecca, on that one.
Yes, I think I have to take this. So actually, I have been in contact actually previously with colleagues from DEFRA who've very much been leading on this about the climate crisis. Particularly, their interest is about the information. I'll just say the information about what is in buildings, so that the building, the components can be reused, because that is a large part of the impact of construction. Is all these things are used, and then you don't know what it was, because products are used in conjunction with others, and so when you demolish a building, you can't reuse or reuse lots of the things, because you simply don't know what they are, how they were put together. So I would say that we are in communication with this. Our locus in the bill is very much ensuring building safety. However, we have not restricted the golden thread. As I've been saying, everyone can go beyond that and using information. And we are still working with these colleagues about whether they could still use the same thing to the information. We could then, take that information that could be used, in the long term about, ensuring there is better, information about how this building was constructed, and therefore, you can then deconstruct it and reuse the materials effectively. So I would say that is actually a work in progress, actually, on that one. I'd say there is many decisions need to be made, because I think they're a bit further back down the line about where, government is about mandating that in the future. So I'm afraid I can't give any better answer than actually, we are still communicating, and there are other public goods that maybe this could be used for, very like the long-term climate change. I will go a bit further, that's saying, there are other goods about using these systems, goods as in, for your business, like making your business more efficient, making it easier to manage your buildings, do repairs and stuff. Now, we are not going down the path of mandating that, because that is very much a commercial need. And we'd say that, if it is beneficial for your business, you should be doing that as well. And you can, and we will be encouraged, setting out, the benefits in the long term to your business of doing this. But that would be very much, that is for you, that's a commercial good for your business, not a public good, which climate change is. And that's kind of might be something government may think of mandating.
Yeah. And asking you, Ammon, because you're working with BRAC, and what's your thoughts in terms of the kind of combining your working group area with the Part L group area on energy efficiency? Give us your views on that in terms of the challenge around carbon and actually using the golden thread for that.
So there's been some public announcements on the Part L, Part F work actually that BRAC has a substantial contribution to, which is a fantastic piece of work which we will go into now, because it's outside of the scope of this discussion. But that cross-pollination absolutely happens, because the working group that we're referring to is effectively a subcommittee in a proxy really of the main committee, and we consolidate these conversations at main committee. So as I said, we have a broader establishment, and we meet on a very regular basis, and the coming together, that meshing, if you like, Nick, is done within the main committee, and then we have we do have those crossover points in those environments. The only thing I would just add to Rebecca's very good answer as well is that this comes back to, for whatever positive initiatives that can come out of offshoots, if you like, of the building safety bill, for want of a better way of putting it. We can't measure or have metrics to move in a different direction to increase efficiencies in other areas of building performance, building safety, or environmental safety, unless we've got data there and unless we've got the information there as a starting point. Because this isn't about reacting to issues that are presented to us. I think eventually we want to get to points within the built environment where we're actually taking preemptive steps to mitigate against future risks, so that we can monitor the performance of buildings, the safety of buildings, and manoeuvre to prevent issues from coming up in the future. Overheating being one of those, off the top of my head. So yes.
Okay, guys, we're out of time now. Thank you all very much for joining, and thank you very much, Emma and Rebecca, for presenting and your really, really great insights. I hope you all have a great rest of the session, rest of the day, and see you all soon. And thank you very much for joining. Thank you. Goodbye.
Can I just say I'll respond to people's questions in the chat as well.
Great, brilliant. Thank you very much. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you.